Hey guys, welcome back to the Magfed Ranch Paintball channel, and today I'm going to be doing another Final Inspect Fridays video. But before I get into it guys, subscribe to this channel, please smash that like button, turn on your notification bell, and of course, watch the video and share and comment at the very end. Guys, I love all the comments we've gotten of late in terms of just questions, very nice, very just, good debates in terms of where we should be pushing the Magfed community and pushing off of our Magfed gameplay, right? But today's video, guys, I wanted to shoot about is what you want to go over on the T15. So instead, in essence, a checklist of what you want to look out on your T15 marker before heading out to play on the weekends, right? That's kind of what the Friday videos are about, guys. It's kind of like, what should we look at on our gear, our markers, our FSR, anything, our setup, before we go ahead out and play. So today's video is going to be a checklist of things we want to look at our T15 before heading out. And guys, I get it. There's going to be way more stuff that I know some of you guys out there have extensive knowledge with the T15. Please add, please contribute. Please shoot your own videos if possible and give it to the rest of us to hopefully make our experiences more enjoyable and more reliable, okay? So the marker I'm gonna be demonstrating on today, guys, is our MR Honey Badger clone. And I really love this marker, guys. It's one of the shortest barrel markers that we make. Obviously it has that multicolored, unique look of the Honey Badger. And I'll start from from tip to butt in terms of some of the things you want to look out for on your T15 before heading out. But before I get into it, guys, one of the absolute necessary things that you will need to have on your overall checklist before you head out is some type of field kit or some type of tool kit. It could be as big or as obviously, as necessary to carry all the things that you need for all your markers, all your different gears. So that is going to need to be determined by you. But basically, you're going to want all the basic tools that you can service your markers and accessories with. You're going to want replacement parts, O-rings, detents, springs, thread paste, tape. Anything like that you might need to service at the field. And then of course, me personally too, I have squeegees, I have my gloves, I have my chrono in here, guys, as well too. I use that paintball chrono station. That works really well because sometimes you don't get to unfortunately have a chrono at certain events, right? I've been to some huge scenario events where, they don't have a chrono and they're not really trying to chrono everyone. So it's always good to bring your own just in case. And it's useful for other players as well too. If you can get them to chrono their marker, make sure that the gameplay is safe and fair. Okay, so guys, definitely an essential part of this is your toolkit and your service parts. Okay, so let's start from the tip back. And guys, it starts with the barrel, right? So we're talking about cleanliness. We make sure that our barrels obviously are clean inside. The T15 and most of the other markers, they're very easy. You can just unscrew the barrel. Make sure you run your squeegee through them. Make sure you clean them out. Inspect inside them, with the flashlight. Make sure that there's no debris of First Strike rounds, paint, or anything like that that might hurt your accuracy. Now, specifically, the reason why I wanted to bring up the barrel of the T15 first is because on the older generation T15s that did not come with the new style M-lock handguard, it had some type of kind of like this barrel sleeve kind of combination, AR handguard holder looking thing. But there's still some barrel wobble with that setup. And so one of the things that you need to do to eliminate that barrel wobble for not only accuracy and performance reasons, but also reliability reasons is you want to make sure that you set your barrel detent screw here that's on the top of the receiver of the T15 correctly. And so what you want to do is, when you slide your barrel in on the T15, right, it has kind of like this L-shaped slot adapter on the barrel. And so that allows it to go from the magazine port to the hopper option port, right? And so once you have it rotated correctly to the magazine port, and now you have the FSR breech cutout aligned with your magazine well, you want to look inside there, with the flashlight obviously, and make sure that that FSR cutout is lined evenly with the magazine well. Okay, so that way you don't want it cockeyed, right? You don't want it side to side. You want it perfectly aligned, so that way when the first strike rounds are loading into the breech, they're gonna go into that slot 100% correctly and not catch on one of the edges, okay? Once you have that lined up, then you set this piece right here. You set this screw here, okay? Guys, go check out my other videos where I explain how to do that with, either using thread paste, which I prefer for this screw, or a very low holding Loctite, whether that's like a purple or green Loctite. You don't want something so harsh like red Loctite that you won't be able to disassemble it again in the future if need be, okay? So that's a very important step. Just make sure that hasn't came loose, if you haven't used some type of thread lock. And of course, if you haven't set it yet, right, of all the T15 players out there, if you haven't set that yet, and make sure that that's aligned properly, go do that right away, because that's going to add a huge reliability benefit and accuracy as well too, because as you can imagine, if the barrel is wobbling around, you see how tight this barrel is affixed to my marker. It's not moving around at all. If you do that, you're obviously going to get consistent accuracy and precision, because the barrel won't be moving around when you're firing the marker. Now, real quick side note, if you guys have the newer Gen 5, I believe, and up T15 like I have here, I bought this just for comparison purposes, guys. This is the same marker. Guys, go check out that video where I did a review, unboxing of the T15. And it doesn't have this issue with the barrel wobble as much, and in essence, not at all, because it comes with a new sleeve in here for the M-LOK handguard that makes the barrel not wobble. So, really cool feature on the newer generation T15s. All right, let's keep going back. Real quick, this is, I guess, not a maintenance issue, but obviously just going back with the optics, right? We have iron sights on this marker, but if you have some type of red dot or an optic on there, just make sure that your zero is accurate, right? Go get that checked out. Going to all the screws and all the hardware components on your handguard, just make sure that they're tight. With abusive use, guys. Hey, that's the one thing good about Magfed, is because we're always abusing our markers, right? We're not playing soft. We're rolling around in the mud, in the natural woods. We're jumping, running, and gunning with it. So, guys, if you guys don't go and Loctite or thread paste these screws, obviously just double check them, make sure that they're tight. Make sure that the handguard, if it's screw-on type, the barrel nut adapter, that's tight. Go and use your AR wrench tool to make sure that's tightened down. Okay, so that's a huge part. Just make sure that the handguard thing is fixed properly. Now, going back further, obviously cleaning, right? We want to make sure that the marker is absolutely clean. And so the cool thing about the T15, right, is we can literally open up the marker, right? And you can look inside the upper and lower receivers. You can obviously even take them out completely. So let's start with the upper receiver, correct? You know, just make sure that if you've had any paint breakage, FSR shell breakage in the past, make sure that you're picking all of that stuff out. I'm using air compressor with a blowgun, guys. That's a good secret to get rid of all the different debris and whatever excess shells or paint in there. Go ahead and obviously remove the rear buffer tube, you know, with the spring, the little cushion, I'm sorry. And then go ahead and remove the bolt and just inspect it, right? Just make sure that all the paint, debris, all the O-rings look good, right? You don't have any, like for example here, I have just a small shell from some FSRs that probably broke off during firing. So go ahead and, you know, clean all that stuff off. Make sure to lubricate your O-rings. I just use, you know, any standard liquid lubricant. I don't use the thick grease-like lubricant on the T15s. I don't think it's necessary for them. And you don't even have to put that much on. Just put a light coating on all the moving surfaces and all the different O-rings. And of course, just check it for wear as well too, right? One of the, I know, known issues in the past was that this bolt would maybe sometimes get damaged and actually get bent. I haven't seen that over with all my different markers that I've shot thousands of rounds through, so I'm sure a lot of it has to do with maintenance and care. So that's another reason why, is just preserve the longevity of your markers. Yeah, so make sure you're inspecting all of that. Of course, make sure you're inspecting, looking down the chamber for the bolt, making sure that there's no excess, right? No excess paint or debris or whatever as well. Of course, you can make sure that your detents look properly in here, right? They're facing the right directions. They still look strong. They look like they'll still hold up, holding around inside the chamber. Quick note about that. I've spoken about this in other videos, but the T15's magazine spring is quite stiff. That is for, probably the reason for that is because it is, you know, highly capable with first strike rounds, and so it needs a stiff spring to work with first strike rounds. So you want to make sure that those detents are good. Replace them if necessary. I always carry a bunch of them on hand as part of my service kit. So that way, if you have a double feed issue or obviously jams because of that issue out when you're playing, you can replace them as needed. You know, maybe find out after how many rounds you just replace them as a kind of a mileage general maintenance interval, right? So that's a huge one. What else? You know, make sure that all your components are in place, that you have the little cushion, the spring, this thing isn't damaged or bent. Have some extra springs too, just in case. I've yet to see these springs really wear down yet. I'm sure it will wear down eventually, but just have extra springs. I haven't replaced one yet, but have them in place just in case. Check obviously your operation of your charging handle, right? Make sure that it's functioning properly. One of the things obviously is make sure that it's catched right here, and that spring and that paw mechanism is working. Okay guys, so just overall visually and cleanliness inspect. A clean marker is a well-running marker. You know, that's the key, guys. With our markers, especially with first strike rounds, if you don't want any jams, you don't want any hiccups, you want great accuracy, all those things are gonna be affected by the cleanliness, the dirtiness of your marker. Okay, let's transition to the lower receiver now. Same thing, just checking all the hardware, guys. These push pins, right, that goes through the lower receiver, just make sure that they're good. Make sure that, you know, obviously your takedown pins are in place. Same thing with your mock magazine paddle, bolt release paddle. That's just a fake, non-functional. Your magazine release is set correct. This is another known problem with the T15, right? If this wasn't set properly at the factory, I guarantee, in my experience, all of them have been set properly at the factory, but just in case if yours wasn't, go and set that. This is very easy. You can push it all the way out, and then you can literally turn it and tighten it like you see here, lefty loosey, righty tighty, and you can get it to engage more properly. Because once again, guys, anything that's gonna mess with the magazine, anything that's gonna mess with the feeding mechanism of the marker is going to cause jams, flips, issues, okay? Make sure that your selector switch is working properly, right? You can feel each individual detent. If the spring inside the grip here is weak, go ahead and replace it, because that's going to obviously affect this selector switch's function. You can hear that loud audible click when it goes to the correct function. This is one of my complaints with the T15. It's not as positive as the M17 marker, but it still works okay. And then of course, when you guys are firing it, just quick note on the field, just make sure when you're firing this, because it's not as positive as the M17, it's not moving to another position when you guys are playing. That's another key thing you want to take into account when you're playing. Okay, this next step that I'm going to talk about is actually super important. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but this is one thing I really want to bring out there in light with the T15 community and people that play with the T15 is this air manifold, they call it. There's an upper half and a lower half. The trigger assembly, for the most part, that encompasses this lower receiver and the little air, I forgot the name of it, but in essence, that lower part where all the air lines go to the back of the stock to feed air. You don't really need to service that stuff. They're all solid mechanical components. So unless like paint got in there, you would just need to clean it. But for the most part, they're non-serviceable. You might want to put a little bit of grease on the bolt catch in the trigger mechanism, just so it doesn't create a wear spot on the bolt where it would catch. But for the most part, those components are not really needed servicing. But this manifold piece does. So let me show you that real quick. So you're gonna need some type of pick tool or a little small punch to engage the pin on the side of the receiver here that's going to release this upper manifold. So just push that pin in and then wiggle it out. Let's see here. It's pretty stiff, so that's a good thing. Okay, there it goes. Okay, and then you have to kind of, as you push that pin in, you just have to kind of slightly wobble it in and out. Okay, so this is the upper half of that manifold, guys. It has that kind of that rectangular, number 8 looking O-ring. Obviously, take a look at that O-ring. If it's damaged, go ahead and replace it. I don't typically see these get damaged that much. I've yet to replace any of mine. That being said, though, be careful when you go to separate the, kind of separate the upper and lower halves of the T15 when it's aired. Obviously, air is going to shoot out of this chamber when you do that. And sometimes it can blow the O-ring off, so just make sure that O-ring isn't missing. And that way you obviously glue it, put a new one back in, okay? Now, the O-ring that I'm referring to is going to be this teardrop O-ring that you see here, okay? This is really important, guys, because this thing isn't screwed down and it's just kind of held in by this little spring pressure little pin on the side of this chamber here, this manifold, as they call it, it can kind of walk itself up out of the receiver as you're firing rounds, right? So as the air is being blown up through this manifold, it's kind of walked this manifold up and separate it from the lower half that houses this teardrop O-ring. And what you're gonna find is, after so many rounds, it's gonna create a big enough gap where this O-ring is no longer going to seal, okay? It's no longer gonna seal, and so what's gonna end up happening is you're going to end up getting a leak, not in terms of just a leak in terms of, like, you'll just hear the gun hissing, right? The marker hissing when you're playing. No, it'll still hold air because the air is stored down below, okay? But what you're gonna end up seeing is that you're gonna see a huge fluctuations from shot to shot at first, right? Because now the air isn't fully going up into the bolt and the barrel, right? Firing the round down the range, right? So you're losing air through that crack in between the two manifolds. It'll start with that, right? Where you'll get a lot of FPS inconsistent with your T15. As it gets worse, right? As the crack opens and opens, you're gonna start getting kind of machine gun fire because now it's losing so much air, and because the T15 is a blowback style marker, it's not gonna have enough air pressure to reset the trigger. And so you're gonna start getting this kind of like machine gun, like, brrr type effect, and then it'll not fire, and then you'll have to go and recock the marker. And it's because of that issue, because there's not enough air to recock the marker, okay? So you wanna make sure that this thing is set all the way in place before you go play. So obviously before you go on the field, just double check it, make sure it's seated all the way, make sure that that teardrop O-ring is seated properly in its groove and not kind of like popping out on the edges. And of course, make sure that that O-ring is not damaged. Go ahead and lubricate a little bit if you guys want, but these O-rings really don't take any lubrication. It's more for just sealing the air pressure, right? And then of course, the hardware that's holding the manifolds into the receiver, just make sure they're tight. Go ahead and Loctite them, or thread paste them if you need to, okay? But that's a very important step, guys. Constantly check that tightness and that seal of the manifold during your gameplay. Otherwise, you're gonna have issues with your T15, okay? Now moving back, of course, we're gonna wanna obviously just, inspect these. These rarely ever come loose, but for whatever reason, if you've taken them off before, you didn't Loctite them or thread paste them, go ahead and check those. And then of course, moving back to the air system, this O-ring in the tank will fail. Now, if you don't remove the air tank frequently, as I do, I don't typically take the air tanks, unscrew them on and off. I just leave them as is and just go ahead and refill the air tank as needed through the nipple here. If you don't do that, the chances of your O-ring failing frequently is low, but just go ahead and replace them. This O-ring is a cheap O-ring. I mean, you can buy a bag, like a bag 100 for it's for dollars. It's super cheap. And it's a simple fix that if this O-ring fails, then your marker doesn't get fed air properly. When you go charge the marker, it has leaks right away, and now you have to take the guide rod out, you gotta unscrew your air tank, you gotta, mess with it, right? So a very cheap, inexpensive way to make sure that your T15 is operating properly and working reliability, okay? So just that O-ring, check it, replace it from time to time. Moving back is the regulator on your air tank, right? Go ahead and get that checked out, just make sure that it's not leaking. I've heard some bad reviews of the low profile regulator on the First Strike air tanks. I haven't had any issues with it, guys, but supposedly these discs, the regulating discs do go bad, and I guess they need to get replaced. And so most people are saying just go ahead and change the regulator out completely. I haven't seen that issue. I don't overcharge my tanks. You know, I set them right at 3,000, 2,900 PSI, so I don't go and overcharge them. I don't take them in and out frequently. So I yet to have an issue with all the tanks, with all my markers, but just something to keep a note of, okay? And then lastly, of course, just make sure if you are using the guide ride setup with the buttstock, make sure this screw is tight. This thing is a very small screw here that holds it to the end of the receiver. And so if you didn't Loctite them or thread paste them like I do, you know, just double check the tightness so that way this doesn't come loose, and then what's gonna end up happening is your buttstock is literally gonna fall out, right? Now, if you're using the new T15 setup with kind of the sticker guide rod, that's not gonna be an issue, okay? But just make sure that that's set in the proper position that you like as well. The other thing I would say before, you know, we end this video is just make sure you check all your magazines. You know, I've shot videos of how to make the T15 11 round magazine more reliable, but one of the things you want to make sure that this top metal plate is not loose, that it's tight. Because once again, anything that's going to create a looseness play issue, right, with this feed mechanism, if it's gonna move around too much and it's gonna cause this to tilt or whatever, it's gonna cause an issue with the first strike rounds catching or feeding properly. So that top metal plate is super important. The other thing, of course, is just the cleanliness of the markers. I've shot videos on how to disassemble these magazines and clean them and inspect them, guys, so go check out those videos, but just make sure they're absolutely clean. Like I said, guys, cleanliness is key with our Magfed markers shooting first strike rounds. They can be dirty on the outside, right? I guess it's whatever, it's a funny saying. You can be dirty on the outside, but as long as you're clean on the inside, you're gonna be okay, right? It's gonna work reliability and perform reliably. Okay, guys, so yeah, that would be my checklist, guys. I know there's more other stuff. What do you guys think? Once you guys add it to the comments, what other things you guys recommend checking or what you had checked in your past. And yeah, let the Magfed community know. Appreciate you guys. I'll check you guys next time. Peace.